What if I told you that the scientific method, the foundation of our modern world, was born from alchemy, mysticism, and secret knowledge? The same people who gave us gravity, planetary orbits, and the scientific method were deeply involved in decoding biblical prophecies, communicating with angels, and searching for the philosopher's stone. This hidden connection between science and the mystical arts challenges everything we think we know about how modern science began. Welcome back to Thalira Wisdom Temple, where we connect ancient wisdom with modern understanding. Today, we're exploring how the scientific revolution, far from being a rejection of mysticism, was actually born from the marriage of empirical observation and sacred knowledge. The founders of modern science weren't just rational thinkers. They were spiritual seekers, decoding what they believed were divine messages encoded in the natural world. When we think of the scientific revolution, we picture rational men breaking free from superstition and religion. But this narrative is incomplete. The truth is much more fascinating. Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, and Francis Bacon, the giants whose shoulders we stand on today, were deeply immersed in alchemy, sacred geometry, and esoteric Christianity. They didn't see science and spirituality as opposing forces. They saw them as two paths to the same truth. Newton spent more time studying alchemy and biblical prophecy than he did on the physics he's known for. He believed the architecture of Solomon's temple contained a divine model of the cosmos, with the central altar representing the sun in our solar system and the surrounding courts symbolizing planetary orbits. Newton was obsessed with ancient measurements, particularly the sacred cubit, which he thought held the key to unlocking biblical prophecy and the timing of the apocalypse. In his private writings, Newton used coded language like green lion and two serpents to describe alchemical processes in his quest for the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. What many people don't realize is that Newton owned more books on alchemy than on physics and mathematics combined. His personal library contained over 100 alchemical texts, and his own manuscripts reveal he conducted thousands of alchemical experiments over 3 decades. One of Newton's most curious obsessions was calculating the exact dimensions of Solomon's temple, not just as a historical exercise, but because he believed these measurements encoded profound cosmic secrets. Newton wrote extensively about the end times and calculated that the apocalypse wouldn't occur before 2060. He based this on his interpretation of the book of Daniel, using a method that combined biblical prophecy with astronomical cycles. A lesser-known fact: Newton suffered from mercury poisoning, likely from his alchemical experiments. The symptoms included insomnia, tremors, and periods of paranoia, which may explain some of his more eccentric behaviors and bitter feuds with other scientists. What's truly remarkable is how Newton's mystical worldview influenced his scientific theories. His concept of gravity as an invisible force acting at a distance, criticized by contemporaries as magical thinking, was rooted in his alchemical understanding of hidden energies and correspondences in nature. Even his masterwork, the Principia Mathematica, contains subtle theological elements. He described absolute space as the sensorium of God, suggesting a mystical link between the divine and physical universe. Newton once wrote in his private journals, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." For Newton, understanding the mathematical principles governing the universe was a form of worship, a way of knowing the mind of God through his creation. During Newton's time at Cambridge, he kept detailed records of his sins and spiritual struggles. These private confessions reveal a man tormented by his own perceived moral failings and obsessed with biblical purity laws. When Newton finally published his groundbreaking work on gravity and motion, he deliberately omitted any mention of the alchemical principles that had guided his thinking. This strategic concealment helped establish his theories as proper science, while protecting him from accusations of practicing forbidden arts. Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion, was driven by a search for divine harmony in the cosmos. Kepler believed the universe was designed according to geometric principles that reflected the mind of God. In his work, Mysterium Cosmographicum, he proposed that the orbits of the 6 known planets fit between the 5 Platonic solids, geometric forms considered sacred since ancient times. What drove Kepler to this conclusion wasn't just mathematical speculation, but a profound mystical experience he had while teaching geometry. Mid-lecture, Kepler had a sudden vision of how the 5 Platonic solids could nest within each other, creating spaces that corresponded to the planetary orbits. He later wrote that this moment felt like divine revelation. Kepler's mother was accused of witchcraft, and he spent years defending her in court. This personal connection to the occult world gave Kepler a unique perspective on the thin line between forbidden knowledge and accepted science. When observations didn't match his beautiful theory, Kepler made a crucial choice that separates him from mere mystics. He followed the evidence. This led to his discovery that planets move in elliptical orbits, not perfect circles. Yet even then, Kepler didn't abandon his spiritual vision. In Harmonices Mundi, the harmony of the world, he calculated that the planets' orbits created mathematical ratios corresponding to musical notes, literally creating a music of the spheres. Kepler wrote, "We are merely apes of God, acting out a drama of the celestial movements." Few people know that Kepler also wrote one of the earliest works of science fiction, Somnium, the Dream. This strange tale described a journey to the moon and the beings that might live there, serving as both an astronomical treatise and an allegorical defense of the Copernican system. Though we remember Kepler for his scientific laws, he was also a professional astrologer who made weather predictions and political forecasts based on planetary aspects. He rejected much of traditional astrology, but sought to reform it through mathematical principles. In an era when most astronomers simply recorded celestial positions, Kepler asked why? Why did planets move as they did? What forces guided them? This question, rooted in his belief that God's creation followed rational principles, led him to discover his 3 laws of planetary motion. Kepler believed that geometry existed before creation, that geometric principles were part of God's nature and the blueprint for the physical universe. This Platonic view influenced his entire approach to astronomy. Francis Bacon, the father of the scientific method, was widely believed to have been connected to Rosicrucian and Masonic traditions. His utopian work, The New Atlantis, describes an ideal society centered around Solomon's house, a scientific institution bearing the name of the biblical king associated with occult wisdom and secret knowledge. The parallels between Solomon's house and the Rosicrucian Invisible College are striking, from their secretive brotherhood of knowledge seekers to their refusal to accept payment for healing. What few history books mention is that Bacon's scientific method emerged during the same years that Rosicrucian manifestos were circulating throughout Europe. These manifestos called for a universal reformation of knowledge and society, the same goals Bacon championed in his scientific writings. Bacon's approach to science retained magical elements, even as it pioneered empiricism. When he wrote that nature must be bound into service and put in constraint, he was using language that echoed Renaissance magical practices, where practitioners sought to command natural forces. In Bacon's vision, scientists were not just observers, but interpreters of nature, who could extract her secrets through carefully designed experiments. He compared this process to the biblical account of how Adam named the animals in Eden, suggesting that scientists were recovering knowledge lost after humanity's fall from grace. Bacon classified knowledge using a system based on the three faculties of memory, imagination, and reason, a structure that closely parallels the Kabbalistic tree of life, suggesting esoteric influences on his thinking. Bacon's personal seal featured a ship passing through the Pillars of Hercules, a symbol later adopted by Freemasonry to represent the passage from darkness to light, or from ignorance to knowledge. Another figure worth exploring is Robert Boyle, often called the first modern chemist and known for Boyle's law of gases. Boyle maintained an extensive correspondence with alchemists across Europe and hired noted alchemist George Starkey as his laboratory assistant. Though Boyle criticized some aspects of alchemy, he spent decades searching for the philosopher's stone and believed in the possibility of transmutation. His private journals contain detailed records of alchemical experiments, including attempts to create the Alkahest, a universal solvent believed to reduce any substance to its basic components. Boyle established that experimentation had to be reproducible and described with precise language, key principles of modern science. Yet he also believed these experiments could reveal divine secrets hidden in matter since creation. For Boyle, the mechanical philosophy, which viewed nature as a machine, was compatible with his belief in an intelligent creator who designed nature's mechanisms. He even funded missionary translations of the Bible, seeing no contradiction between spreading Christian faith and advancing scientific knowledge. The Royal Society, Britain's premier scientific organization, emerged from informal meetings of natural philosophers, many with connections to esoteric traditions. Early members included astrologers, alchemists, and Freemasons, alongside what we would now consider conventional scientists. Their motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, expressed a revolutionary approach to knowledge based on direct observation rather than ancient authorities. Yet many founding members saw this empirical approach as complementary to their spiritual quests, not opposed to them. The Society's early demonstrations often had a theatrical quality that would have seemed familiar to Renaissance mages, dramatic experiments performed before audiences to reveal nature's hidden properties and powers. What makes these figures so remarkable is that they stood at the crossroads between two worldviews. They combined rigorous observation with mystical insight, creating a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern science. They didn't reject spiritual knowledge. They integrated it with empirical methods to create something new. The scientific revolution wasn't a clean break from mysticism, but a transformation of it. Instead of seeking divine truth through Scripture alone, these pioneer scientists sought it through the book of nature, believing that God's wisdom was encoded in the physical world. This historical pattern reveals something important. Major scientific breakthroughs often occur at the boundaries between different systems of thought. Einstein's imagination was influenced by philosophical questions about the nature of time. Quantum physics pioneers like Wolfgang Pauli collaborated with psychologist Carl Jung, exploring connections between physics and the unconscious mind. Even today, theoretical physics often ventures into territory that sounds mystical, multiple dimensions, observer effects, and non-locality that defies common sense. This hidden history matters for several reasons. First, it shows us that the divide between science and spirituality is more recent than we think. The rigid separation we see today would have been alien to the founders of modern science. Second, it reminds us that great breakthroughs often happen when we connect seemingly separate domains of knowledge. Newton, Kepler and Bacon crossed boundaries between disciplines that didn't officially exist yet. Third, understanding this history helps explain why certain scientific concepts were accepted or rejected. Newton's theory of gravity was initially criticized not because it failed mathematically, but because the idea of action at a distance seemed too similar to occult forces. Finally, their approach offers a model for contemporary seekers trying to integrate spiritual wisdom with scientific understanding. Their legacy reminds us you don't have to choose between being rational and being spiritual. You can be both. By the late 18th century, the mystical aspects of early modern science were actively downplayed or erased. Scientific institutions wanted to distance themselves from their esoteric origins to gain credibility in an increasingly rationalistic age. Newton's alchemical manuscripts were hidden away, deemed embarrassing to his legacy. They weren't publicly studied until the 20th century, when economist John Maynard Keynes purchased them at auction and declared, "Newton was not the first of the age of reason, he was the last of the magicians." This sanitized history created the false impression that science advanced only by rejecting mysticism, rather than through a complex integration of different ways of knowing. The next time you hear someone claim that science and spirituality are incompatible, remember the alchemist Isaac Newton measuring the dimensions of Solomon's temple, or the astrologer Johannes Kepler searching for divine harmony in planetary orbits. Remember that the scientific method itself emerged from a worldview where the cosmos was alive with meaning and purpose, not just dead matter in motion. Perhaps in rediscovering this lost connection, we can heal the split between our scientific and spiritual selves, finding a more integrated way of knowing that honors both empirical facts and deeper meaning. What might emerge from a renewed conversation between these two approaches to knowledge? How might our understanding of consciousness, quantum physics, ecology, and other frontier areas of science be enriched by acknowledging both the empirical and the meaningful dimensions of reality? If you found this fascinating, hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you integrate scientific and spiritual understanding in your own life? Thank you for joining me on this journey through hidden history. Until next time, keep seeking wisdom in all its forms. All. At the Lyra Wisdom Temple, we're dedicated to bringing these timeless teachings back into everyday life. Our journey doesn't end with this video. It's just beginning. If you found value in what we've shared today, please consider supporting our work. We offer wisdom-filled designs and teachings at thelira.com that help integrate these ancient principles into modern living. Together, we can rebuild what's been forgotten, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. The soul's journey isn't just personal, it's our collective heritage. Until next time, remember, you are not just a body having a temporary experience. You are an eternal consciousness on an infinite journey.